Hello, World Singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back. We are in the middle of our exploration of Cosmere religions.
If you are the type of person that is just down for the Cosmere in any way, shape, or form, continue to listen to this episode. If you kind of want to start from the beginning, Volume 1 awaits, and you can go back and check that out. We talked about last time Rashar and Scadrial and discussed a bunch of the different religious beliefs throughout the history of those two planets. And today we are going to tackle a variety of different planets throughout the Cosmere.
Starting with Sel, on which we get the book Elantris, which is maybe the most religion-focused Cosmere work to date.
It does seem to have a real intricate connection and a focus by Brandon on tying in the religion and the way that religions are fighting each other, the politics of the world, the magic of the world. Everything is very connected to the religion on Sel, or at least in this area.
One of the religions.
Yeah.
Of Sel, yeah. Because we get in Elantris, one of the main characters, Hrathen, is a priest. And we spoke last episode about how there is kind of a spectrum as to how integrated religion is within a society or a planet and how connected it is to all of the other aspects of that population. Last episode, we talked about Scadrial, not super connected, Rashar, very connected, and Sel is another place where it seems that religion is pretty unavoidably connected with almost every other aspect of life for the people who live there.
So do you want to start with, and all of these religions, and pretty much all the time for me, pronunciation, not my strong point, but we're going to give it our best shot. Let's start with Shu Kesig.
Yeah. There is a pretty well laid out history of religion on Sel, unlike on some of the other planets in the Cosmere. Shu Keseg is the sort of original religion that many of the current day Sel religions come from. It's originally from a Jindo priest named Keseg, and his teachings were that all of mankind was united. He preached for unity, and he had two disciples named Dereth and Korath who collected his teachings, and then later, after he died, they disagreed on what it meant to achieve the unity that Keseg advocated for.
So in a parallel to religions on Earth, this has some similarities to Islam, which started with, in their belief, the Prophet Muhammad, who had two followers who kind of disagreed about the teachings of Muhammad. And then you get the biggest branches of Sunni and Shia Islam, respectively. And so this kind of similarly happened on Sel, where the religions kind of split right at the beginning or right after the founder died.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on Sel, Korath took the perspective that people should sort of passively achieve this unity by, being persuaded to love each other. And Dereth thought that if people, wouldn't willingly love each other, that they should be dominated and then forced to unite. And that would mean a central government, essentially. He thought unity was really like everything is united. We are all under one umbrella, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, and definitely we've seen that on our own planet. Definitely seems like there is some parallels when it comes to these religions on Cell, I think that what I find most interesting and unique is this belief is so interwoven into the religions, because we have missionaries and people who are from a different land in Elantris preaching and trying to convert a religious population. So missionaries, all over the world, all different types of religions either didn't have missionaries, but like that is a unique aspect and one of the examples of where Cell is in its development. To give a comparison in our own world to like the 1500s, when like the worlds were kind of all clashing, the continents were being crossed, and you got all these trade routes opening up. That's kind of what it seems like is going on in Cell, and part of that is these religions clashing and being shared, and new converts and new cities, all this type of crazy stuff.
In particular, as you were alluding to, the specific branch of religion that Hrathen is a part of, we start to see that, he is a warrior priest of Shu-Dereth, so this branch that believes everyone should be under one government, and it is, in fact, part of an empire that is expanding its power and influence at the time we come into Elantris.
And that's probably one of the most scary things for the people of Elantris, is that they have this failing of the city of Elantris, their kind of like beacon, and where a lot of their own religious belief is tied up in the Elantrians and what that magic means.
Yeah, and that's an interesting sort of fly in the ointment here. The Elantrians are part of a like more ancient, some would consider a more primitive religion, where before outside influence, the people who lived in Erelon, the city around Elantris, worshipped the Elantrians, these magical
Why wouldn't you?
people. Yeah, exactly. And then when they were evangelized to the, disciples, the prophets that came to evangelize this new religion to them, sort of adapted the religion that they were evangelizing to the existing beliefs of the population of Erelon, and kind of worked it all together, right, to make it like more palatable to that population. And so they changed the name of God. Originally it was a Jindo word, Dashu. They changed it to Domi, which is based on an Aeon, right, part of the language of Erelon. The Aeon Omi, meaning love. And they used that Aeon to represent the church, which some people considered to be like pagan. Obviously no one's ever happy. There's a compromise, which, as we know, is to be halfway happy.
The depth and the intricacies of this religion define so much of the backstory and the influences of all the different characters that we meet in Elantris, Hrathen most obviously, but what I think is most interesting is the fact that this division between Shu-Dereth and Shu-Korath represents in such a realistic fashion, or in a way that just makes sense. We have so many examples throughout our own history about how larger religions that were part of an expansive empire adopted or changed themselves to local customs and to local religions. The name of something is very obvious, but what also came with it were cultural practices in the way that like the worship is done.
Yeah, like the history behind modern day Easter and Christmas coinciding with festivals that already existed in certain populations. It's very similar. And just this like picture that we have on Cell of the way that a religion grows and changes and splits over time is pretty cool.
And I think it's one of the most interesting things about Cell is that we got this kind of one-off early work of Brandon's that he has not written a sequel to. Now, not every one of his works has a sequel, but a lot of them do. I mean, a lot of them have follow-ups, and I think Cell, like Nalthis, is one of the current stories without a follow-up. But the groundwork is all there. The religious history we know was set up on kind of a cliffhanger because Hrathen was, in his perspective, performing a noble mission of last-ditch effort before the invasion.
He sees it as like trying to save the souls of an
all
entire city. Yeah.
Because the empire is coming behind the priest, the preachers. The religious figures are bringing their belief system, but also their culture, and they are the first wave of an empire and a military that is grinding its way towards Elantris.
In this religion, as we said before, Hrathen is a warrior priest. They're not just priests. Like, he wears a full suit of armor.
And he has some magic, too. Does everyone in Shu-Dereth have access to the type of hemalurgy manipulation?
I don't believe so. So yeah, that's another good point. We've talked about it previously on the podcast, but since this is our religions episode, we should say that Shu-Dereth is the religion that the Dakhor monastery is a part of. But that is like a specific sect of monks. No, not all of the Derethi priests are Dakhor.
Exactly.
They're like the extra super
special
monks. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is replicated on Earth in the religions that we're familiar with and have seen practiced throughout history, where certain people, the most devout, the most whatever, the most, are always trying to kind of create groups that are smaller and inside the main group that have some certain practice.
Well, yeah, and I would say it doesn't even always have to do with being the most, but just that there are different groups who choose to express their faith in different ways, right? So there may be like a convent of nuns who dedicate themselves to caring for children.
Yeah.
There may be another convent of nuns who dedicate themselves to something different, a different way of expressing their faith. So hopefully that there are other monasteries within the Dereth religion that are, nicer, maybe.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is when you can get so lost in the weeds, and we don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but the concept of religion as a interwoven aspect of societal change, like religion is able to change and it's able to kind of adapt, and it's very flexible. And as you were saying, like, Christmas iconography from northern Germany, pine trees and little ornaments hanging off of and lights, like, that's Germanic. And yet you go to holidays in Los Angeles in the middle of the desert, and you got the same things going on. And that's part of the ability of religion. The unique aspect of religion is it's this kind of idea that it's like a meme, it morphs and changes over time and kind of picks up on the influence of the culture around it, and then they pass it on in their own way, and it's this idea that grows in an organic method. And so I would definitely think that some of the people are like Hrathen and the Dakhor monastery, but other people in Shu-Dereth have got to be operating with the same underlying religious belief, but a different method and different mindset. Well, that's
a good point, actually, because Hrathen is a good example. He starts at the Dakhor monastery, and then he's like too much of a wimp to
a little bit, but
go through. I mean, in quotations, because he's actually just like a decent human being and is like, I don't feel great about like live sacrifices. Not sure this is really for me. Like, I don't want to be in the Dakhor monastery. And that's something that Dilaf looks at him and is like, oh, you're just a wimp. Like, we're the real faithful monks, us in the Dakhor. But in this way, like, Hrathen is a great example that there is variation across this religion. But I think, kind of going back to what you were saying about religion being intermixed with the religious and the political, particularly in a place like the Fjordell Empire, where the emperor is also the pope, essentially, of this religion. They call him Wern or Vern.
With a W. Just, it's got a little bit of a Scandinavian.
Yeah, very Scandinavian.
Influences.
It's called Fjordell.
Exactly. So
Fjords, anyone?
It's basically Frozen. Frozen 2, out now in theaters.
We're not being paid for that.
And the way that the variant, Shu-Karath, has been a focal point of the people of Erelon, the city around Elantris, and how they connected that to the Elantrians and the magic powers going on, it reminds me that the way that sometimes beliefs that go back thousands and thousands of years, the way they begin is often through some connection to a real focal point, a real point of geography. A mountain explodes and all of a sudden lava is pouring down, and then the god becomes something like an exploding mountain, a fiery beast, some type of manipulation. Or cultures that are near the coast often have like water deities or creatures based on the sun as like a focal point. It's just, it is so often connected to something real and tangible. And then in the Cosmere, we know that there's like magic and investiture that is pouring off and flowing through the shards on these different planets.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point in particular for Cell, because I think in other religions that we see in the Cosmere, it's easier to tie them to the specific realities that they are like stemming from.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here on Cell, it's not immediately clear to me that this religion, Shu-Kaseg, at its outset has anything to do with the shards of dominion and devotion.
Now, do you recall if Cell is one of the planets where life existed, human life existed before the arrival of the shards?
Oh, yes. I believe that the Arcanum states that humans existed on Cell pre-shard. So it totally could be that Shu-Kaseg is pre-shard religion.
Or at least stems from something that was pre-shard and then changed over time and adapted, and maybe adapted to the arrival of the shard. Because I feel like...
Yeah, I think it also is a little bit interesting. This might be like too deep of a pull, too speculative, but it's interesting that this religion is based on unity originally, at the time that maybe that Adonalsium is breaking apart. I don't know. That seems like it's related. Like maybe Adonalsium is unity.
And so is Dalinar.
Dalinar is not unity.
He says, I am unity.
I know. This is a big
thing.
Debate in the Cosmere community, and I do not participate.
What all of these different Cosmere stories remind me of is that Brandon is kind of a explorer who's like unveiling the Cosmere for us, the reader. And when he is exploring around and finding these stories in the Cosmere, creating them, there are ones that become more profitable or more interesting to him for whatever reason, and those become the Stormlight Archive and Scadrial Era 1 and 2 and Mistborn Secret History. And Cell has been like marked. He's definitely, done some exploration around the area, but there's also so much more. It's like the biggest dark spot in the Cosmere right now.
Because I don't know if it's the biggest dark spot. I think we have more on Cell than we do on Nalthis, because we have like the Emperor's Soul that explores other groups and
Yes,
other
a whole other
societies
empire,
on
yeah.
the planet. Yeah, like the Rose Empire. We know that there are those weird soul stampers who use blood.
Exactly.
Right?
Kind of like the Dakor, but their own version in that side of the
Yeah.
continent.
Yeah. And then we have seen the Jindo a little bit. I think there's one Jindo character in Elantris, but we don't really know anything else about their culture or religion other than this. It's the origin of Shukaseg, and they have some kind of martial art based magic, it seems. So there's plenty more to get here that Brandon has laid the foundation for, and we're just waiting for him to build on it.
Another one that we certainly are waiting for the follow-up, which I believe has already been named Nightblood, or at least pre-title, is called Nightblood. Jumping over to Nalthis. Nalthis perhaps has the most obvious example of religion as the key element of plot, where on Cell it's happening in the background of everything and it affects everything and characters' motivations. On Nalthis, religion is literally the reason for the existence of the Returned.
We are inside the religion.
Yeah, exactly. It is such a wonderfully simple and yet instantly intricate and explorable way of diving into Nalthis. Just be like, oh, now you're in the court of the gods.
Well, and I think it's an interesting culture and environment to make the choice to tell the story from within the religion. All of the other stories that we get, we see the religion from outside. And I think actually by taking the Cult of Return and introducing the reader to it from the inside of the religion leaves more mystery rather than revealing more about it, which would be maybe the more instinctive thing that you would think would happen.
Yeah, it's like that idea of the more you learn about a subject, the more intricate the subject becomes. The more you learn, the less you know type of quote. And that is what Nalthis feels like, is we get dropped right in to the Cult of the Returned, or what is also named the Iridescent Tones.
Well, we see the God King. We see all of the Returned, like the focus of the religion. However, we come to realize that these figures of the religion actually have the least power within the religion. So versus on Cell, when Vern is like the big all-powerful emperor, like the main religious dude has all the power. In this case, most of the power is actually being held by the priests and sycophants and the bureaucrats, essentially, who like run the religion and not actually the subjects of the religion.
That's an excellent way to contrast the two, because it's absolutely right. Literally the more powerful character, the God King, is the one who's more imprisoned. But the Returned, who are clearly very powerful, are also imprisoned, and they are also controlled. The only one who kind of escapes from this is Vasher, who's basically, snuck out from his uber powerful, because he found a loophole, basically. But I believe that Nalthis and the Court of the Gods is really the perfect way for Brandon to not just introduce a religion, but to build a story around it. What would it be like if there were gods, like the Greek gods, the Roman gods, that had this role to play in society in a very active way, where all the humans and the lesser, mortals are reliant and interact with the gods? It's a different thing than we see on many of the other planets. Not that humans never interact with the gods, but in such a clear and out there way.
I think this is also a really interesting exploration and depiction of the concept of what would humans do if they became gods, or like what would humans do when given godlike power.
Powers.
Yeah, that kind of thought experiment. This is an interesting take on that, I think, because in this circumstance, they're not doing much of anything. It's kind of like, yes, we do have the power to change the world, but what do? We sit at home in front of our televisions and read Cosmere books. And these people, you know, they come back from the dead. They have tons of power. They have people who worship them. They could probably mobilize plenty of movements for the good of more people, but they sit in their palaces. They look at art. They could choose to look any way that they wish to look, and they all choose to be statuesque and beautiful and, you know, the perfect version of physically attractive, and they're beautifully useless.
Now, we mainly see and follow the religion back and forth from Ciri and Lightsong. What I love so much about Lightsong as a character, and we've talked a lot about...
Lightsong is so great.
What I think is best about his character is the way that he doubts his role. And as you were saying, he notices the hypocrisy of their power and their position, their stated goal, like what everybody tells and knows about the Court of the Gods is that, oh, they have this one great purpose. They were chosen by God, who we know because of some word of Brandon's, that the one who is choosing the returned is Endowment, the shard on that planet. And she is giving them their immortal breath, the one breath that they need to have, and the one that Lightsong eventually gives up and sacrifices himself for. So this is a known aspect of their religion, that the gods are waiting to do something great and important. And that concept bothers Lightsong so much that he has his character arc in the story.
I want to draw a parallel here between Lightsong and Dalinar. I think Lightsong is similar to Dalinar's questioning of, like, why don't we have shards that we can use to dig trenches, right? Is like essentially the same question that Lightsong is asking the whole time, is like, why do we have this power and it's not useful to a lot of people? And in fact, it's killing a lot of people.
Which is such a deep question that it makes sense that it's not one that I'm guessing Brandon has a great answer to, because there are many examples of religions, governments, organizations all around the world that have a bunch of power, a bunch of organization, a bunch of money, that could be doing one thing, but have chosen, and through momentum and through passive acceptance and through propaganda and through manipulation, but through all these different ways, that kind of ends with not as much being done as could be done, even though the mission is so clear. Lightsong knows that he has one great thing to do, and most of the gods know that as well, and instead they're just waiting for something, and the wait is the problem. Like, just go do the something. Like, just go be amazing.
Well, because every day that Lightsong exists and doesn't use his power, he is literally taking the life of
Another
a person that,
well,
you know, he's supposed to be serving, essentially.
Yeah, taking their breath. They don't actually have to die, do they?
Oh, yeah. You're totally right. It's just they take the breath. So the person is just a drab. But, I mean, still, that's a drab.
Absolutely. 1 week is how long the normal divine breath would last. But every week, the person has to consume a breath and, you know, turn a person into a drab in order to maintain their life.
So this is interesting. I just thought of, like, maybe originally when Endowment sort of, like, conceived of this act of, like, hey, maybe I'll send back some, like, particularly good people. Maybe the idea was, like, I'll send you back with some power. You have 1 week to do a great thing for mankind. Like, go get him, buddy.
Add into this idea, what about, we know that there are often give and takes, restrictions on power. Not even the shards are truly omnipotent. So imagine if the restriction that Endowment has is she can only give out a certain number of these return slots. there's a set number, I'm just making it up, but like 20, okay? What if she only has 20 to give, and her plan was you'll get 1 week, and then you'll die, and you'll come back, and I'll recycle, and so the 20 keeps going. And instead, these people are taking up...
onto it.
Exactly. They're like old politicians that run for 50 years and never go on. They just leave, man. Just leave. Let someone new come into the slot, because there's only one slot. There's only one person that gets to be whatever. And there's only a certain number possible, this is not confirmed, but possible that could be returned. That's, I would imagine, even a worse position.
Yeah.
If she came up with this kind of loophole to whatever her own power limitation was, and...
I was like, hey, humans, be awesome, and I'll give you cool powers, and then we just, keep paying it forward.
Exactly.
Do something great. Then come back to mama, I'll give you some more power.
And instead we get a whole cult, literally named that, like, it's probably fine on their planet, but a literal cult that develops around these divine breath-bestowing individuals, and the religion is born. Then, of course, it becomes locked into the government, and like you said, the people who are the most, in quotes, powerful with investiture and breath are actually the least potent or able in their governmental system.
Yeah, okay. So here's what I'm thinking. People come back as returned. Ideally, right, you would have some kind of like shaman or, group of elders who would find that returned person, like welcome them, be like, hi, welcome to your second life. Your purpose is to, offer your divine breath in a great way for humanity, like guides them along their second life path. But somewhere along the way, that shaman or that group of elders was like, we could use this to our advantage. Like, we can use this to make us powerful. And then, bam, here we are.
I think that's probably exactly what happened in the history, and it's why the character of Scoot becomes so potent and emotional, and it's such a huge tie-in, because Lightsong is always questioning. He's like, I'm not right for this. This is, how dumb is this religion? He's pointing out all the flaws.
I don't believe in me, so how do you believe in me?
Exactly. And the reason that Lightsong has earned this belief from Scoot is because Scoot knows his backstory and knows that Lightsong saved his daughter because they're brothers or were brothers before his death. So he's the most true believer in this religion, and that relationship, that connection, that wonder that would be created is on display between Scoot and Lightsong. You can just imagine, what if every single time that endowment sent someone back, it had this type of effect, this type of a ripple effect on the family and the friends and the whole society and culture.
Yeah, of like inspiring them to awe and wonder and kindness.
Yes, exact kindness. The most important thing is like they give away their breath in one big thing because they did something great the first time, or I think there's a little bit of a question about who exactly goes back. Lightsong was a good person, but I don't know if it always has to be a good person. What I mean by that is,
I don't know if it's like actually confirmed. Like, it is confirmed in world, but that doesn't mean that it's real.
Only because I know that part of what is happening is that when the person dies, for some reason, endowment selects them. And when they meet with endowment for a short period of time, they are given a vision of possible futures, like we've seen with other shards. And then they are asked if they want to return to try to impact. So yeah. I could kind of see this also as endowment, like, picking out the cards that she thinks are best from the deck.
Yeah.
And then giving them the option to play their hand. Because obviously she can also see future stuff. Like, she also has that ability. So she's playing some type of game too. Or at least I imagine that all the shards are kind of playing some game. We just don't know what it is.
Let's move on to another section, I guess, of Nalthis, Pankal. And the Pankal religion has some similarities to the Iridescent Tones, but it doesn't include actually worshiping the returned. It's more animistic, so they are worshiping like the sea and some type of unity of the 5 gods. They believe that one of the 5 gods that they recognize is the ultimate voice that calls the returned into being. So essentially, they have a concept for the shard of endowment.
And then they put, as you said, some type of spiritual belief into their natural world and their natural surroundings.
Which is also interesting because we know that there is the flowers of Edgley, which is another outpouring of like power from endowment.
Yeah, totally correct. Just the tears of Edgley.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of the flowers, but the tears.
But they are flowers.
Exactly. They are flowers, and they are highly desired because of their ability to produce dyes that hold and are incredibly bright. So it becomes the focal point of the economic power of Haladrin.
Because they're the best for awakening, right? It's like the most powerful conversion for their magic. So there is some kind of investiture-ish type thing.
Oh, it's definitely investiture based because they only grow in one place, and it is believed to either be the site of endowment's power on the planet, or at least some connection to her in the past, maybe where she transcended, maybe the first spot that she walked. We don't have like the backstory, but it is definitely 100% connected to the shard of endowment itself and the vessel who is named Edgley.
Yeah, so the Pond Call do have that seed of truth of like their world is divine and is invested by their shard.
What about Austrism, which is the last of the religions we'll look at on Nalthis, because
Austrism is the religion that Ciri and Vivenna start with. So they are both from Idris, the sort of neighboring kingdom to Halandren, and there they worship Austra, who they also call the god of colors. And I think it's really interesting how these two societies both have a basis of like worship of color and take it in two completely different directions.
Because one of the cultural aspects of City of Idris and the followers and worshippers is that they themselves downplay any wearing of color, or certainly when it comes to those with the royal locks, you got to keep that under control, because to wear bright colors is to offend God or to kind of steal from their glory.
Yeah, exactly. They like want to downplay themselves as much as possible to not take anything away from their God. So if their God is everything colorful, they have to be drab. Otherwise, it is blasphemous, right? Like they are trying too much to be like God.
And this is why we have the original conflict or tension between Ciri and Vivenna, because Vivenna is seen as the perfect example of a believer and a follower and a perfect representative for their country, in part because she's able to control her royal locks. She seems to, though that's always an aspect of Warbreaker, is that what appears on the outside is not always what's going on, but Ciri feels different, and she is the one that is like an outsider because of her love of color and brightness, and the experience that she wants to have is different than the one that is being allowed by the religious society and aspects of that religion in her society.
And Austrism has some fundamental tenets that they call the 5 visions, which are supposedly visions that were had by the first returned person, Vo, and then communicated to, the people before he ended up dying. And they not only talk about downplaying your outward appearance, like you said, controlling the royal locks, etc., wearing plain clothing, but also like being conservative with your inner aspect as well, of like, It emphasizes sacrifice, being very humble, looking out for other people before you. No kind of ostentation at all. You are meant to downplay yourself in every way and like only be a vessel for helping others, basically.
When it comes to Vivenna and Ciri both entering into the world of Hallandren, one of the other things that they have to get over, Vivenna specifically, is the concept that breaths are uniquely tied and intimately tied to the soul of the human. They believe in a much stronger connection between the breath and the soul, and to separate those two, or to use the breath of another person, to hold the breath of another person, is sacrilege.
Yeah, it's like a defilement, essentially. You are stealing someone's soul.
Yeah, part of someone's soul at the very least, which is, I'm pretty sure, just as bad. I don't think you get away with, oh, no, I just stole part of your soul. It's totally fine.
And so Awakening has this kind of like witchcraft or black magic. They see it almost like a Dakor's power, right? Of like, you had to sacrifice somebody to get this power. And
they're not wrong in some ways. There's always got to be like, some loss.
They're not totally wrong.
In the world that Brandon creates, these fantasy worlds, we talked a lot about hard magic and soft magic systems. And one of the aspects of hard magic system is that there is trade-off.
Yeah, I think it makes this so much more interesting rather than just having an endless well of power, right? That people can just awaken. Like, look at all the cool things I can do. There are real life consequences for all of the things that they do. And everything has to go through like an actual conversion process. They can't just do magic. They have to use a color, think about what they want to happen, frame the correct command, and then thinking about these moral considerations of like, how did I get these breaths? Like, is it right? Is it not right?
Obviously, it's something that our main characters overcome, and we know Vivenna holds some breaths as she jumps over to Rashar, or is at least able to find a conversion method, which is why we believe, not hard confirmed, but we believe that Vasher chose to go to Rashar, is because he has some way of taking in Stormlight, some type of conversion, and he needs that in order to survive, as he is a returned, one of the 5 scholars. And so we assume that either Vivenna carried over some breaths or also knew that conversion method on Rashar. Let's jump over to Taldain, a planet that we see almost exclusively through the White Sand novels, but is home to Autonomy, who is just about everywhere in the Cosmere that we know of. So we expect Taldain to continually come up through Autonomy and kind of learn more about Taldain over time.
And Chris.
And Chris is obviously our Cosmere scholar running around the universe. But what I found so interesting about the creation of the White Sand novels is that, once again, the magic system was uniquely connected to the geography of the world, the climate of the world, the politics of the world. All of them are intermixed, interwoven, and it's done in, again, a very unique way.
And a lot of the plot of White Sand centers around the religion and the extremists of the religion, as well as just kind of your average follower like Ice, who's just, she's a pretty average woman, but she is, devout in her religion.
Well, she's also a badass.
She is. That is true. With the best storyline in that book.
But you have Kenton, who becomes the leader of this quasi-religious, quasi-political. I know it's not religious, but they have magic powers. So therefore people actually kind of worship them.
Well, it's actually atheistic, which is the problem.
Point, yes.
Yeah.
Well, the point for other characters, Ice specifically, is that Kenton's existence challenges her belief system. It's like a slap in the face almost.
It's exactly the same as like Ciri and Vivenna, where Idris sees using color as blasphemous, whereas Hallandren sees it as a celebration of their god. the Sandmasters don't necessarily see it as a celebration of the Sandlord, but to Ice and the other followers of the Kurtza religion, it's a blasphemy. Their god is the sand god, and you can't just fling him around like that.
Well, and I think it's something also about the people of Idris. It's about kind of abusing the power of God, because for the people who worship and follow the Sand Lord and practice Kurtza, they have this concept that the sun is a manifestation of the Sand Lord. In reality, we know that the sun in the Taldain system is autonomy's source of investiture.
Yes.
And the power that the Sand Masters, and Kenton specifically, use is about taking that investiture, taking that magic that belongs to autonomy and manipulating it and changing it. And so I kind of see it in the same way as, like, you know, taking the colors from the color god would be blasphemous. It makes a lot of sense, but it's done in a consistent way across the Cosmere, but in unique ways on each of the planets.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we see between these two groups, the Kurtzians and the DM of Sandmasters, obviously they don't agree, and the DM has a big part in the government of their shared country, Los Andes. They have had a lot of wars in the past, and we hop into the story originally at a time when there is peace between them, which is then the catalyst for the whole story, is that the Sandmasters get attacked by Kurtzians.
What I love about the potential of Taldain is that not only are there problems and divisions on Dayside, but we also have the problem that the Darksiders are coming and interacting more and more with the Daysiders, and Chris is just one example, but clearly there's like small enclaves of Darksiders that are interacting, and they are bringing their own belief systems. And if all the people who live on Dayside and basically kind of all have some respect for the sun, what's going to happen when those people are running into literally their opposites?
Yeah, it does beg a very interesting question of, if your entire religion is based on the fact that you are on Dayside, basically the sun, the sand, what exists on Darkside?
It's a big mystery, because even in the White Sand volumes, we get very, very little about Darkside.
Yeah, and I can't remember if Ice has any kind of reaction to the
Animosity
Darksiders
or something.
Yeah, like you would think, at least I could imagine, that people who worshipped the sun like this would imagine that people who lived on part of the planet that the sun never touched, you would think like, oh, well, God must hate them. Like, they must be bad people. They live their entire lives
in shadow.
Yeah, outside of God's love, God's presence, etc.
That's why I believe that Taldain is, I mean, we're seeing like a civil war or a couple of civil wars on Rashar, but Taldain is a planet that seems to just go to war with itself and like consume itself. We know the Darksiders are working on weapons. We know that the Daysiders have more access to the source of investiture and magic. So there's this huge potential conflict that has been introduced, and we know that it was introduced in our timeline of the Cosmere in the distant past, that through some type of problem of relativity, something that Chris is doing while she's traveling, she's super, super old in the Cosmere perspective, but has aged slowly. I'm thinking like Ender in the sequel to Ender's Game, for those who know that. Well, it's like a 30-plus-year-old book, so I guess I could spoil it. But basically, because of relativity, he's able to travel far in the future and only grow up, 30, 40 years to him, but thousands of years go by in the universe. And so I feel like Chris is kind of doing something similar, but she could have also just discovered some cool magic like Hoyd.
Yeah, I put her and Hoyd in the same category. But I think you make a good point that Taldain is an interesting, like, petri dish, sort of, for the concept that we've talked about on this podcast before, of how investiture or magic can delay what might be typical technological advances. So on Dayside, where they have investiture, they do not have firearms. On Darkside, we assume they don't have investiture. It seems, new to Chris. They are starting to develop technology. So I think that's sort of an interesting thing to see all on this one planet.
Absolutely. And it begs the question of like, what is going to happen on Taldain?
Yeah, as they start to intermix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could then just carry that over and ask what is going to happen when planets in the Cosmere start to intermix. And we've already seen the first wave are kind of priests in Hoyd and Chris and the 17 Shard. And these people who are kind of traveling throughout the Cosmere, they're kind of like that first wave showing up on other planets and influencing in one way or another. Small to start, but eventually they might be bringing the Empire behind.
Well, I was thinking about First of the Sun, where we see a very, very technologically advanced civilization interacting with what would be considered a very primitive civilization. And like we see what happens when those two worlds come together.
Yeah, I mean, resentment on the part of Six of the Dusk, a kind of cynicism.
Just like a completely catastrophic change in culture,
breaks
society.
Everything down.
Yeah, the roles that people play within their society, like it changes everything, and it changes it artificially, and it changes it faster than the people can really keep up with or, sustain in a healthy way for their whole ecosystem.
It is one of the most fascinating things to look at in history is if you are studying any area, any people, any culture, any religion, any group at all, and then a new outside force is introduced, all of a sudden you go, okay, something's going to happen. It's going to be war. It's going to be disease. It's going to be conflict. It's going to be cooperation. It's going to be a little bit of everything. It's going to be crazy. And certainly that is the history of humanity that we can observe. And Brandon is translating that into these books in such a fascinating way. And because we just have the short story for First of the Sun, I think that it's one of the things that I'm most excited for in the future, because it might be the answer to a lot of the questions that we're asking now, but we don't have the full answer. We just have this like brief little glimpse, but it might be the answer to a lot of our questions once it's fleshed out, and we'll be like, oh man, First of the Sun was key. It was cornerstone. It was
I
something.
Already feel that way.
Of course, like we can, but that's more speculation. I'm talking about like hardcore.
It's just for sure.
If we find out that Wax and Wayne's descendants are actually the people who showed up on First of the Sun, and that they like some type of crazy connection that's like distant back to the Scadrians or something, I'm gonna lose my mind.
And I think that story is the key to themes and concepts that we are going to see all across the Cosmere. In this long horse race that is our Cosmere experience, I got some money on First of the Sun.
It's going to be big time, peeps. It's going to be big. Just like betting on Google when they're still in the garage.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, I'm calling the shot.
Yeah.
Just like the babe. Just First of the Sun. Pointed out, people, in the sky, in the stars. These 2 religion episodes certainly didn't cover every religion in the Cosmere. We know we just kind of picked a couple.
Scadrial alone, we could have done like 50.
Exactly. But we're not Zazed, people.
Yeah. What do you expect from us?
I think both of the episodes have shown that the way that Brandon incorporates his own religious belief, his historical knowledge of religions on Earth, and he infuses that into his world building and his writing and his characters and their motivations, and maybe the overall mystery of the Cosmere will all be unraveled around a religious or spiritual knot, and that this huge journey is going to be super tied together in an intricate way. That's what we are all hoping for, a type of wheel of time.
I think that's unavoidable.
It is at this point, like, the big dream
it's
of all of us.
It's all based on ad nauseum.
Of course. And like we want the perfect
spinning together.
We want it all to be woven together, and it feels woven together, and all of these characters and stories feel real because of Brandon's dedication to an understanding of religions, both real and fictional.
Well, and what a great example of what it truly means to be a great writer, that not only do you have to have excellent command of the language that you're writing in and a creative mind to come up with these things, but you also have to be like a scholar and a historian, and you have to understand politics and religion and all of these other elements that we've been looking at that all blend together. And when someone can do all of that, which is an incredibly masterful feat in and of itself, they can create these incredible worlds and this world building that gives the reader an experience that transcends what we may find in an average novel.
So, Brandon, keep on writing. We'll keep on reading, having Cosmere conversations. You can follow us along. Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, we're everywhere.
Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.